Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos postgame reaction podcast, brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing, as the Toronto Argonauts take down the Calgary Stampeders 39-25 in the second half of their back-to-back, the revenge game for the Toronto Argonauts at BMO Field. My name is Ben Grant. I'm joined today by John Hodge from 3 Down Nation, and I'm really excited to be joined by John. JB is otherwise engaged today, and I was going to be without a co-host. John Hodge made the trip here just for this podcast. No, I'm joking, but he was here in Toronto for the first time at BMO Field, and I'm like, John, will you join me? Be my co-host on the X's and Argos podcast, and he's being a sport and joining us here. So welcome, John. I'm happy you could be part of this.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I'm honored to be here. I'm a little underslept, but I'm over caffeinated. So I think that my energy level will be at a all-time high for this.
Perfect. That's all I can ask for. And before we get to sort of a recap and looking at what went on in tonight's game, I want to talk to you about Something in the Water Brewing. Something in the Water Brewing is the perfect place to go before an Argos game. They've been our sponsor now for the last 2 seasons, and they have been fantastic. And so I know you, as a CFL fan listening to this, you love supporting sponsors of CFL products and CFL shows, and Something in the Water couldn't be a better one to support. Next home game, get out to Something in the Water Brewing in Liberty Village. Grab yourself a Longboat Pale Ale, the beer that was made for fans of the Double Blue, and I promise you won't regret it. And maybe you'll see JB and myself down there as well. In Liberty Village, it's only a few steps from BMO Field and a few steps from Lamport Stadium, where the Argos practice. All right, let's get into this one, John. It was a wild one. A story of 2 halves, which was a lot like last week's game with the Stampeders. Last week, the Argos came thundering out of the gate and then really had nothing left for the second half. Tonight, it was Calgary that came out ahead 15-7 at the half. What went on in the second half of this one?
Well, I mean, when you get 2 splash plays, like we saw, Janarian Grant, first of all, we got to talk about him. I had the pleasure of watching Janarian Grant up close and personal in Winnipeg, where I live and based out of, lived my whole life for many years. And he's incredible, right? He's got 4 return touchdowns on the year. He's on pace to shatter the single season CFL record. When you get the pick 6 to Sean Amos, incredible play on that Jake Mayer-Paul, right? When you look at the raw stats, right? If you take the score out of it, like my reaction to the press bugs come the final gun was, how the heck did Toronto get to 39 points, right? This is a team that put up 5 points in the first half. So obviously the defense came to play, the special teams came to play. I didn't love the offensive play calling throughout this one. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more in the show, but I love the way that they closed it out on the ground to finish this one. Certainly a tale of 2 halves. And if you missed the first half of this one, you still saw about 95% of the action. So that's a good one. What you didn't want is to catch only the first half and miss the second. That's not good. That's not how you want to do this one.
No, exactly that. The first half we can forget about, but that second half was, man, that was really something. It was just back and forth, and the Argos obviously ending up on top there. But some huge plays. And it's funny, you look at the stats. Nick Arbuckle finishes the game 18 of 26 for 181 yards, a touchdown, and interception. And like you're saying, like that stat line, you look across the field, Jake Mayer with 373 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And you say, well, how did Toronto end up with that many points? But they found a way to do this all season. The Toronto Argonauts are the highest scoring team in the CFL this year, despite having a really stagnant offense at times. And like you're seeing tonight, yes, they had over 100 yards rushing, but only just. And they certainly weren't doing it through the air, but they were getting plays from all 3 phases. The defense contributing with a pick 6, that Janarian Grant touchdown we'll talk about a bit more in a second. And the offense did get going in the second half. They were able to score a couple touchdowns. So they have it in them, but they have needed to count on the other phases and not just get it done offensively. Unfortunately, their defense and special teams continue to step up.
Well, and let's talk about the offense for a little bit. Like I loved the opening series. Like they got, let's remember Anthony Vandal making his first career start at right guard. Asia Cage, who I didn't think had his best game at left tackle, left due to injury. So you got Ryan Hunter playing out of position for part of the game. You got Dylan Giffen, a guy who has not started a lot in the CFL, coming and playing guard. I love the way that they set the tone at the start. Physical game, pushing the ball on the ground. And then I think they set up, they're waiting for that look, right? They got the blitz from Calgary. They're in max protect. They got Mackay Polk in man on Trey Roberson. It looked like they tried to pick on Trey Roberson in field corner a few times today. with the double move, Nick Arbuckle threw a beautiful ball touchdown. I wouldn't surprise me if that was scripted to start the game. I thought that was brilliant from Ryan Dinwiddie. Also loved the last drive, right, where they were pushing the ball down along the ground. This team's got Kadeem Carey playing a revenge game. You got Deontay McMahon, who's of course the we'll call him the lightning to Kadeem Carey's thunder. Daniel Adeboboye, who I think is underrated. Kevin Mattal, I thought showed some nice things tonight. Obviously, only the one carry, but a lot of short receptions, yards after the catch. Loved the last drive. In between, some question marks for me. I didn't love the play calling. I thought they abandoned the run, especially with the shakeup on the offensive line. They tried one time really to kind of push the ball down with some tight windows, and that's when the interception happened. I don't think that's totally on Nick Arbuckle. The ball was tipped. Micah Awe made a great play, diving to tip that one into the arms of Demario Houston. So I love the start and the end of the game from Toronto's offense, but you're right, Ben. Like this team's defense and special teams have carried them. They're 5-4 at the midway point of the season, despite having, I think, what can fairly be called a mediocre at best quarterbacking between Nick Arbuckle and Cameron Dukes. There have been some solid weeks. There have been some more, struggling weeks. And I think they deserve a lot of credit. I mean, they've got the reigning league MOP sitting on the suspended list. We don't know exactly what's going to come of that. It's possible he's back after the bye week. We don't know yet. But ultimately, this team, for the 5-4 record, they're still in a position they could potentially host a playoff game, maybe even the East Final, depending on what happens with the Alouettes. But I think that the defense and the special teams deserves a ton of credit for sure.
I agree with you on the play calling, and it's unfortunate they got away from the run, not nearly as much as they did last week, where they only ran the ball 3 times in the second half. Clearly, Coach Dinwiddie listened to his own advice, and he called himself out on it last week at the end of the game. In his postgame press conference, he said, I needed to run the football more. He got away from it. But they could still have run even more than they did. You're right about that when they went heavy. And I think there's a fear from offensive coordinators sometimes about being too obvious, but that's okay when you're running the ball as well as they were. And with these guys that are playing in for Isaiah Cage and playing in for Gregor McKellar, where you've got guys like Vandal and Giffen in the game, these are good run blockers. You can declare, we are running the football. That's essentially what they did in the opening drive, where they're lining up with offensive linemen as tackle eligibles, as tight ends. And they're saying, hey, guys, we're running the football, and they ran it anyway. And that's what they did at the end of the game. Why get away from that in the middle?
Well, and the sign of a great run offense is when everybody knows the run is coming and you could still get the yardage. And that's exactly what happened on the last drive, right? That ended, of course, in the Kadeem Carey touchdown run to really ice this game and make it a 14-point spread late. If you can run the ball, when Calgary's got a good defense. I don't think they're brilliant against the run, but clearly, right, even when Calgary knew the run was coming, they weren't able to stop it. And you're absolutely right about Anthony Vandal. By the way, shout out to him. He was, I believe, the last pick in the 2023 draft. If not, he was one of the last picks out of Sherbrooke. 2023 was not a strong draft overall, and he has made the most of his draft position, working his way into the starting lineup. But Dylan Giffen is one of the biggest human beings probably on the planet. He's 6'8". I believe he's listed at 340. And I do think he's actually that weight. When he played at Western, he was close to 400 pounds. He lost a considerable amount of weight to play at the professional level. So when you've got a guy like that at guard, we know that Ryan Hunter's a great player. We know Peter Nicastro is a great blocker at center. Dejon Allen is the reigning most outstanding offensive lineman to the CFL right tackle. If you've got these tools, run the ball. I would have loved to see Kadeem Carey at 20 carries, Daniel Adeboboye at 5 to 10. I would have liked to see a little bit more of Deontay McMahon. He only got the one carry, but he made the most of it, 11 yards. So I would have loved to see a little bit more of that. But again, moving forward, depending on who's the starting quarterback of this team, they might not need to run the ball this much, especially if they start to get a little more healthy along the offensive line.
Let's talk about a couple of scoring plays. And so you addressed that first one at the end of the first drive. Toronto's pounding the football. I love that as a way to get single coverage, because you want these receivers, these Toronto receivers, DeMonte Coxie, Davaris Daniels, Makai Polk as well, who is really going to turn into something. He's special. You go back and watch some of his film at Cal and also after he transferred, and he's got some tremendous skill set. He can go up and get it. He's the tallest receiver on the Argos, but he's also got a shiftiness and a run after the catch ability that you don't always see from rookies that come up from the States. He is sensational, and I love watching him on the practice field. So anytime you can isolate any of those 3 guys, you want to do it and run heavy sets. We'll get that. And Calgary committing to that. It was sort of a slant and go route that it looked like he had against Trey Roberson, and Arbuckle doing the smart thing. He was under heat. He just threw it up, put air under the ball, and he's going to let his receiver go and find it. It was just a perfect call. And maybe my second favorite pass from Arbuckle and the Argos was actually on a 2-point conversion to Dave Ungerer. And so this is late in the game. It was a play where they used the goalpost, which I think OCs don't do enough of in the CFL, because it's a real advantage you have as a player and an offensive coach. In the CFL, of course, the goalposts are plunked a yard deep in the middle of the end zone, and Unger essentially used that post as a screen. And so he comes across the middle of the field and basically sidles up next to the post, and there's nothing the defender can do about it. Arbuckle just gunned it right at the post, and Unger picked it out. So I thought there was some clever play calling, some opportunistic play calling in this one that led to some Toronto points. I love to see that creativity from Coach Dinwiddie and the Toronto offense.
Yeah, it's illegal to use a player downfield as a pick. It's perfectly legal to use the post downfield as a pick. You can do it. You can. And I agree. It was well done. And I'll say this, there, as a spectator, there's few things more beautiful, I think, in sport than when you're sitting up, especially with the aerial view that we've got here, whether it's the press box, the call box, whatever. And you can see the play before the quarterback's even pulled the ball back to throw. You know where it's going. And that was one of those plays with Polk. It was very clear as the second that Trey Roberson set his feet, that Polk was going to blow by him and have all that yardage. And you're right. Credit to Nick Arbuckle. I mean, there was no safety help from the middle. He didn't have to put it on a dime, and he did a great job of putting it up in a play. I mean, Mackay Polk was going to be the only person in the area code anyway. You do see quarterbacks sometimes spook themselves a little bit on those types of plays with the receivers so open. He threw a great ball. I didn't love the ball that he threw to the same end zone later in the game when he was rolling out to his right.
I don't know what
nobody
happened
home in the end zone. I don't know if it was a wrong route. I don't know if it was just a terrible read. I don't know. But inevitably, without knowing the play call, it's tough to say exactly what it was. But that I thought could have cost this team had they not obviously sealed it on what I believe was just the very next drive. But all in all, I mean, when you've got a backup quarterback in the game, the best thing you can ask for him to do is to play mistake-free football. And I thought Nick Arbuckle generally did a good job of that. I mean, he had the pick. I don't think you can 100% blame it on him. He also had the fumble, which I think we'll talk about a little bit. But all in all, he played well enough for his team to win with the help of the great defensive effort, the great special teams effort. I don't think he can be too critical.
That pick looked like it could be a real turning point in the game because Toronto was driving with under 2 minutes to go and really putting something together. And the problem was they ended up in a second and long situation. And Mike Alway knew there was no way Toronto was running the ball on this. So there were no read steps for the linebacker. Right from the snap, he started fanning out at 100 miles an hour. And Mackay Polk had a dig route from the slot. And normally, Nick Arbuckle knows, and in normal conditions and normal play, I've got a window there as soon as he clears the halfback. But because Alway had been coming from the word go, he got out there fast enough. He was able to tip it. And unfortunately for Arbuckle and for the Argos, it went right into the hands of another Calgary defender. And, really turned the first half on a dime because Calgary ended up marching it all the way back into the Toronto end for a score. And that put them up 15-7 going into the half instead of what could have been a very different game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of those plays you chalk up to a great defensive effort, right? Mike Alway made a tremendous play. There's not a lot of linebackers in the CFL who cover that much ground, fully lay out for the ball, and get just enough of their hand on it to tip it into the waiting arms. Somewhat fortuitously, I would say, into the hands of the DB. But it was a great play. You give him that. Let's talk about the fumble.
Yeah,
because that was a play that I thought could have changed the game. And in a way did. After review, it was ruled a fumble and a recovery by Calgary. But had the play not been blown dead, Cameron Judge probably scores a touchdown. And instead of that, Calgary was scrimmaging, I think, is their own 30-yard line?
They were at their own 14, I think, after that.
My goodness.
Because they gave it to Calgary at the point of the fumble. And this could have been, I think at the time, I thought, wow, that game could have gotten out of hand. So if you missed the play or you didn't see the game and you're just listening to this the next day, what happened on the play is Kadeem Carey ran the football wide and had a really nice gain on the play, but I think he tried to hurdle a defender and got cut low.
It was wild.
Ended up doing a 360, and as he was in the air, the ball came out. Now, the referee blew the whistle almost immediately, thinking that the ground had caused the fumble, but it hadn't. Judge picked up the ball, I think before it even hit the ground. I think it bounced up into the air and he grabbed it and he was gone. He's only stopped running because he heard all the frantic whistles, and the Calgary sideline, I think rightly so, lost it. And the command center buzzed in at that point and decided that this was indeed a fumble, but instead of it being a touchdown, they can't award the touchdown because the whistle was blown, and so they gave Calgary the ball back at the 14. So what was interesting about this play is you had two sidelines furious on this play. The Toronto sideline was furious because Calgary had already burned their challenge and they didn't have a challenge left. It wasn't ruled a turnover, so it's not automatically reviewed. And so Coach Dinwiddie on the sideline is like, why is the command center buzzing in on this bang bang play and taking another look at it and giving Calgary the ball? And the Calgary sideline is losing their minds at the official who blew it dead on the sideline when that ball was clearly still alive. So a great way for everyone to just turn against the officiating in the command center altogether.
Well, and I think we need to acknowledge the greater context, which was, of course, the debacle that was the command center on Thursday Night Football between the Saskatchewan Roughriders and the Ottawa Redblacks. Regardless of whether or not the command center calls were correct, I think the unanimous feeling from Rider fans, from Redblacks fans, from CFL fans across the country, at least a cursory look at social media will tell you that nobody was satisfied, right, with that result. There were a lot of people who were very upset, feeling the game, the flow of the game was compromised, feeling as though the ending of the game was compromised. There was a moment where the Red Blacks celebrated victory. There was a moment that the Riders celebrated victory. And then, of course, the game culminated in no victory. It was literally a tie.
Everyone was so mad.
Correct. It was an unbelievable finish. And so I think that further puts the spotlight on what I do think was a questionable call. And actually, I do think the command center was 100% right. It was a fumble. But what the officials on the field need to do when it is a very close play like that is they need to let it fully play out. I know Argos fans don't want to hear that because they don't want Calgary.
But I think in the grand scheme of things, they do.
And they generally do, which is why it was shocking to see them blow the play dead and blow it dead so late. Like Cameron Dodgers, granted, he's very fast, but he was 20 yards down the field, right with the ball in his hands, and suddenly they're blowing it dead. If you're going to blow it dead, right? And if you're going to let it go, let it go. That seemed to be kind of the worst of both worlds in a way, which is unfortunate.
And I think on the other side of things, you have to have established some sort of protocol for when exactly the command center buzzes in, because it does seem to be very arbitrary. So they buzzed in there. And I think what Argos fans were so frustrated about is Calgary didn't have a challenge left. And so why is the command center buzzing in on this particular play to say, hey, let's have another look at that, knowing that Calgary can't challenge it? And so if that were always the case, if any play that the command center sees as, well, hang on a second, let's take another look at this, then that's fine. But it's the inconsistency that I think upsets fans. And in this case, we're talking about an Argos play, but I think this goes league wide with every fan base. There is a little bit of frustration just in not knowing what the process is, what the protocol is, how come they can buzz in seemingly sometimes, but not at others. We see some plays where clearly, upon seeing the first replay, you're like, oh, I don't know about that. And yet there's nothing from the command center. But we don't want to make this about officiating. As you and I have both said on multiple occasions, you think the officials in this league generally do a fantastic job. It is the hardest sport in the world to officiate. And normally they're great with it. And even with our complaints, at the end of the day, they usually do get it right. But there needs to be a better process where you don't have screaming fans at the end of every football game wondering what went on.
Yes, and I will reiterate what you said. I think generally the officiating in the CFL is good. And it is also one of those things that when the officiating is good, we ignore it. And when the officiating is bad, we complain about it. It's kind of like offensive line play, right? When the offensive line plays amazing, it's very rare that fans go, wow, the offensive line was killing it today. Usually they only talk about the offensive line when they've given up 6 sacks, which happened last week, actually. Yes. And Toronto's offensive line today was much better. You would never have known that the Calgary Stampeders dominated Toronto's front 5 last week. So credit to, obviously, the guys up front. Credit to Ryan Dinwiddie. Maybe that's why we saw some more conservative play calling this week. I don't know. But regardless, I agree. We don't want to make this about officiating. And I will say this. I think Toronto did deserve to win this game, right? Like, Janarian Grant, you got the touchdown. You got the defensive touchdown. It was a 14-point spread. As much as I do think the game was closer than the score it indicated, I do think that the right team won. I don't think that this is a case where the officials handed the game away, but I do think that we need some more clarity from the league as to when the command center can and can't butt in. And at the end of the day, I think that maybe probably this is an off-season thing. Maybe there just needs to be an entire review of the process, because as time's gone on, right, we have asked for more and more reviewing, more and more analysis, more and more video replay. And I think the pendulum has probably swung too far in one direction, especially when we're not necessarily confident the calls will be correct after investing all the time, the energy, the resources into trying to get them right.
Yeah, exactly that. No, so that was a play that could have really swung the momentum the other way. Let's talk about a play that did swing the momentum, and that was the Janarian Grant punt return touchdown. Janarian Grant was on fire for a stretch of games early in the season, and really Winnipeg and Calgary last week did a great job of bottling him up, and they just would not let him escape. And finally, Mickey Donovan's unit today got him back on the right track. Janarian Grant had a couple of almost returns that were called back on penalties. Deontay McMahon had one as well that came back due to a penalty, but that punt return touchdown was a thing of beauty. It was blocked wonderfully, and Janarian Grant, one of the things I like about him is he won't shy away from going to the short side of the field. You so often see speedy returners look for field space, but even if there's a tiny gap up the sideline, and that's what he saw here, he'll take it. And I love the coolness that he showed, because he's running, he's dodging people, and he sees Tyshawn Blackburn in front of him as his only blocker. And he's got one guy left in Cody Grace. And as he's running full speed up the sideline, he's directing traffic, pointing at Tyshawn Blackburn. He's like, get that guy. And Blackburn turns around, sees Grace, hits that block, and no one's left to touch Janarian Grant as he runs into the end zone. That was a huge momentum shift in this game.
It was so fun to see in the middle of the play in orchestration. He almost looked like a conductor at the front of the orchestra, right? Directing traffic and saying, hey, look, that guy, that punter weighs 245 pounds. Please don't make me run through him. Please block him for me. Cody Gray, I think he's 6'5", 240.
He's there's some big special team players.
The biggest punter in CFL history.
Yeah. And like Haggerty's not a small guy either. He's about 6'5", 252. There are some big guys out there. Boris Beatty's a big load.
Oh, that's a good point.
But
true.
There are some, but it's unusual. It goes against the stereotypes.
It very much does. Paul McCollum can fit in your jacket pocket. Right. Some of these guys, amazing kicker, amazing punter. Yeah. But Cody Grace is a guy you don't want to have to run through along the sideline. Though Janarian Grant, to his credit, for his size, pound for pound, has done a pretty amazing job running through defenders in the past. I love this run. There was no second wave for Calgary. Right. And the second that Janarian Grant noticed that, he went, boom, I have my small seam that I need. And once he isolated it, you're right. He was essentially gone. Cody Grace was the only man to beat. That is now 12 on his career. He's got 4 this year. I believe I have to look at the updated standings, but for the career, I believe the leader is still Henry Gizmo Williams at 30. I don't think we'll ever see somebody catch that number.
No.
But I believe Pinball is next at 14. I haven't seen.
I'd have to take a look.
But like the point is, this is a man who is legitimately close.
Yeah.
To reaching the second all-time list. And I think right now we can very comfortably predict that even though we're only halfway through the season, Janarian Grant will be named the most outstanding special teams player in the league this year. Even if he has 0 returns beyond this point, 4 traditionally is enough to get you the award. He has been so dominant. He has been so good. And you know how much time, that's the other thing. During the practice week, how much time, energy, effort is being put in by opposing teams to say, how can we limit Janarian, right? And they don't kick to him on kickoffs either. They're kicking to Deontay McMahon. They're not kicking to Janarian. What can we do to eliminate him? And lo and behold, right, they're just not able to. Right, I actually talked at length. I talked to Mickey Donovan at the 2022 Grey Cup about Janarian Grant because he'd had a punt return touchdown in the West Final. And Mickey Donovan made no secret about the fact that he thought Janarian Grant was an incredible player. And lo and behold, he did return a punt touchdown in that game. Win, but he got so anyways, that was one of the first things I thought about when Toronto was successful in signing Janarian Grant this offseason, going, hey, I bet Mickey Donovan is lighting a cigar right now for 2 reasons. 1, he has Janarian Grant, and 2, he no longer has to game plan against Janarian Grant. So the fact that he's able to do this when other teams know what's coming and are surely putting their best possible week of preparation in is unbelievable. 4 in 9 games.
I know.
Unbelievable.
It is unreal. And that actually ties an Argos single season record set last year by Javon Leake. And so he's come right back with the 4 return touchdowns and tied that Toronto single season record. And so
and
it is still half a season to go.
And who is the reigning most outstanding special teams player in the CFL?
Yeah, it's Javon Leake.
It's Javon Leake.
I know the guy I know. And that was the thing, like in the offseason, Toronto fans were, there were a lot of losses, and, Darius Pickett goes and you see AJ Olette go to Saskatchewan, and, Toronto was really upset about all of these losses. And Javon Leake was high up there in the people saying, how are we going to replace that kind of specialist? And I didn't know the answer to that question either, because there wasn't anyone that jumped out on the roster. And lo and behold, Janarian Grant was available fairly late in the process.
Very late.
And they brought him in for the start of camp, and boy, did he make a difference. You think about this season and how different it might be for the Argonauts. Those 4 return touchdowns have come into play. They have resulted in wins for the Argonauts in 3 out of the 4 cases, I believe. So yeah, it was a huge get for Toronto.
Well, and at the end of the day, this team is 5-4, right? We're at the midway point of the year. We've got a bye coming up. I think you have to give this team at least let's put it this way. If you were to assign a grade to this team on how well they handled Chad Kelly's absence, I think at worst you give them a B+.
Yeah. That was the expectation coming into this season. Yeah. Like my co-host JB and I both said preseason, you need to be 4-5 or 5-4. That is your goal. If you can get through week 9 with 4-5, 5-4, you've won. That's where you just have to tread water. And I think they've done a little more than that, because 5-4 obviously is on the positive side of that. And, a couple of games that could have gone either way. They probably should have lost that game to Winnipeg, and they probably should have won the game last week in Calgary. But at the end of the day, they've got 5 wins with really quarterback play that I think was, not the best at times. We saw 2 pretty good games from Cameron Dukes. The rest of the quarterback play has been a little bit iffy. Nick Arbuckle did what he needed to do tonight, but it hasn't been what has won them games. It's been defense, it's been special teams, it's been the running attack. And, this is a pretty good spot that Toronto finds themselves in, as they now have to wait to see from the league if indeed Chad Kelly is going to be allowed to return to play after his 9-game suspension.
Yeah, in a way, you'd almost, with the defense, the special teams, the weapons, the offensive line, you'd almost think of this team as like a sports car. And so far this year, they've had a mediocre driver.
Yeah.
Right. And if all of a sudden you can put an elite driver in this vehicle, you go, holy smokes. Like, can this team go 8-1 the rest of the way? Like first place in the East Division could be on the table. I'm not saying, the Alouettes are going through their own quarterback injuries right now. Davis Alexander looked, he's decent last week. We'll see what he does this upcoming week. He's making his second career start. But I don't think the Ticats, I know Labor Day is still coming up, the home and home. I don't think Hamilton is in a realistic position to catch the Argonauts. The Red Blacks have been hot, but again, Drew Brown just got hurt. They just lost the game they really should have won last night on short, or they're coming off the bye. The Riders coming off a short week. Riders banged up, 2 blocked field goals, all that. So I like Toronto's chances of hosting a playoff game this season. I don't think that first place is off the table, just because, again, of how well. Now, should also be said, I'll speculate for a little bit. Let's hypothetically say Chad Kelly plays after the bye. He's going to be rusty. I think that's fair to say. He's not going to be the MOP Chad right away, but I think if you're the Argonauts, you have to like where you're at the midway point of the season, because this team could have been 2-7, right? Yep. And if you're 2-7, you're going, okay, we're our ceiling right now is sneaking in a third place and just kind of making the playoffs and seeing what we got from there. 5-4, you're still very much in control of your own destiny.
Let's finish up here by just talking a little bit about Toronto's defense tonight. The play of the night for the defense was Deshaun Amos's pick 6, and he read this from a mile away. Deshaun Amos has been playing fantastic football all season. You haven't seen it in the numbers because quarterbacks just haven't been going his way. He's been draped all over opposing receivers, and tonight I thought he made a couple near plays, and then he took off on that one. I think, trying to remember who the receiver was on that play. I think it was Hyman that had sort of stopped in a void, and Deshaun Amos was behind him. But before Mayer even looked Hyman's way, Amos recognized that it looked to me like a film study pick, because he seemed to recognize the concept, know what was coming, and broke on the football. Hyman stopped his feet, didn't come back to his quarterback, and Amos did a great job of getting to the spot. But not only that, making that catch, it's much harder than it looks because you're coming back full speed towards the quarterback. We saw Sales missed one that could have ended the game for the Riders last night. Same thing. He broke on the ball, but it's really tough to catch a football waist high in that position when you're coming back like that. He secured it and nobody was going to catch him. He was off to the races. It was nice to see him get rewarded like that because it's a bit frustrating. I know he talked this week to Mike Hogan, my broadcast partner, and Sean Bowen, and he talked about how he wasn't getting that many opportunities. He didn't have any tackles. And he says, defensive secondary players don't often want to lead the league in tackles. That's not usually a good stat, but you have to think he wants to play. And, you've seen that firsthand in Winnipeg with Dietrich Nichols, often doesn't have a lot of tackles because quarterbacks just don't want to go anywhere near him. And you're seeing that from Amos this year. So it was great to see him get rewarded the one time the quarterback decides I'm going after Deshaun Amos.
It looked like a lot of bend but don't break, right? From Toronto's defense. I mean, Jake Maier finished the game with 373 yards, but he needed 45 fast attempts to get there. Like there was a lot of underneath stuff, and a lot of that yardage was actually yards after the catch. If there's one criticism I would have of Toronto's defense is that they did not tackle well enough. No, I think they're missing Wynton McManus in the middle. In that regard.
Like, what about that play where Reggie Begelton dragged Priester? I don't think in my life I've seen a receiver drag a Sam linebacker, but still, it doesn't matter. He had Priester on his back and ran for about 25 more yards. He was contacted at the 30 and was down at the 1 yard line. I don't think I've ever seen that before, as multiple guys were bouncing. It looked like a video game. You just don't see that.
My favorite football movie is Little Giants. There's the great scene where the Cowboy the Cowboys got the ball and there's a kid who grabs the jersey and the jersey stretches and stretches and stretches and stretches and the running back doesn't go down. It reminded me a little bit of that play. It did look somewhat comical, but you got to give credit to Reggie Begelton. I mean, incredible competitor. That's probably going to be our play of the week from 3 Down Nation. Though maybe I'm speaking too soon. We still got 2 games to go. Maybe somebody do something even more impressive, but. Regardless, the tackling was not up to snuff. That being said, I think that Deshaun Amos did a great job. When you have that bend but don't break off ball coverage, you know that at some point somebody's gonna take that risk, right? And I think you're bang on about the film study. He chose the perfect ball to jump. He jumped it perfectly, and he made no mistake bringing it back to the house. That's probably the biggest play of the game. I think, aside from maybe the Jeremy Grant return, but. Sensational. It was the straw that broke the camel's back to some extent. And if you're Jake Maier, right, 33 of 45, you put 45 balls in the air. He put 1 in harm's way tonight. Yeah. And Deshaun Amos absolutely made him pay for it. The other thing I will highlight defensively is I thought, this defensive line has either been without Jake Ceresna or Folarin Urmilade for almost the whole season due to injury. They both played tonight and it showed. Yeah. Right. Flo had a brilliant, I don't think it was actually a sack because I believe Jake Maier had crossed the line of scrimmage. Maybe he was very close. I know the stats crew in the press box was trying to figure that out. Yeah. I'm not sure if it will be officially listed as a sack, but regardless, he stripped Jake Maier of the football. Jake Maier, I think, thought that he had enough time to keep looking down the field. I'm not sure if he was going to take off or not. And Florian Urmilade, a guy who's giving up probably 30 pounds to Jake Maier. Yeah. Caught him from behind, made him pay, stripped the ball. Turnover. And
that was a real turning point too, because that sped up Jake Maier's clock. Jake Maier had looked very comfortable until that point in the game. And suddenly that turnover changed him because he had a little bit more happy feet. He was getting rid of the ball faster because early on he hung in the pocket and took some deadly hits and just managed to get the ball off. A deep one to Begelton. There's another one on a 10-yard dig route where he was just getting smoked in the pocket, but he was hanging in there. And after that sack fumble or whatever we're scoring it as, it didn't look like he was nearly as comfortable and seemed to pull the trigger a little faster in the pocket. And so that may have changed some things. So while the Argos didn't necessarily register 10 sacks tonight, they were making noise and they were getting to Maier. And I think as the pass dropbacks continued to add up for Maier, he started wanting to get rid of that ball faster and faster. So that was a difference in the game. One last thing I want to talk about before we sign off, just because I do talk a lot about roster construction in this podcast. I find it a really fascinating element of Canadian football because you're not only thinking about ratio, you're thinking about special teams play. There was an oddity in tonight's depth chart for the Calgary Stampeders in that they only dressed 1 running back, no fullbacks. It was just Peyton Logan as the only running back. And we saw wasn't the difference in the game, but you saw a couple times where Peyton Logan had to come off the field, once because he lost a shoe And who comes in there? Tommy Stevens came in to play running back. Your backup quarterback was lined up to the right of Jake Maier in a running back position, running flat routes as the Stampeders are desperately trying to come from behind and tie this game up. So that's a lesson as to why you typically don't just dress a single running back. I don't know if I've ever seen a team do that before.
Well, Chris Treveler has run routes a couple times for the Bombers this year. Once was just injuries. The other was, I think they were trying to catch the opponent, unaware, and they fully did, and then he dropped the ball. So they haven't thrown the ball to him since. But I get what you're saying, Ben. And with the CFL's limited roster sizes, I don't think it's ill-advised to talk about roster composition. The one thing I'll say is this. I think for a long time, coaches overthought things. If you go back 70 years, the most sophisticated of offenses, even in the NFL, was more or less, okay, you do this and I'll kind of try to throw the ball to you. And over time, right, we got so sophisticated that I think we overthought it, right? Like think about a great returner. Or think about Cordero Patterson. I'll use him as an example in the NFL. Everybody for years said, how do we get him the ball? And it took somebody to go, have we thought about just handing it to him? Right? Because he was a receiver, but who kind of struggled with the ball skills with that. And lo and behold, they just said, oh yeah, he can just play running back. Like you can just hand him the ball. And so I think if you're, the Ottawa Red Blacks with Braylon Addison, right, Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Chris Treveler, or Nick Dembski, right? Like we've seen more and more teams. Kevin Mattel did it tonight for the Argonauts, right? As a slot back. Every now and again, if you want to give a guy a touch, why don't you just literally give him the ball? If he's got fresh legs and he is, right, an explosive enough athlete that he is somebody on your list of, man, we got to get this guy touches, just hand him the ball. You don't have to overthink it. Mattel went for 9 yards on his carry. Deontay McMahon went for 11 on his carry. Just hand him the ball. And Tommy Stevens' run was also good. What was it, 5 yards?
I know.
It's certainly better than the second. Oh, by the way, we didn't talk about that.
Oh, the short yard.
Ralph Hawley. That was unbelievable.
Yeah, let's talk about that play.
Unbelievable. Huge turning point because that was in Toronto. I believe that led to the drive where Arbuckle threw it away after he rolled out to his right. But it still resulted in a field goal. And in a game this close, I mean, you can't overlook that. That turnover was massive.
It was a 3rd and 1 play, and it looked like Tommy Stevens was going to roll down the line of scrimmage, and he had the edge, except that Ralph Hawley burst through the line and somehow caught Tommy Stevens. Like, this is a 300-pound, he actually admitted this past week, he's lost a ton of weight since getting to the CFL, because he says he's actually, at practice, it feels like he's a skill position player with all the running they do. And he's not used to that as an American big man, but the CFL game style is a little different. And he's like, yeah, I'm down. He's dropped a lot of weight. Maybe that made the difference, because he was able to catch Tommy Stevens from behind, and that was a huge turning point in the game. So yeah, huge play from Ralph Hawley.
And I think Tommy Stevens is the consensus #1 short yardage guy in the CFL. I mean, Tommy Stevens is what, 6'5", 260?
He's massive. Yeah.
He's the biggest quarterback in the league. And I mean, he runs very well. It's why Calgary Stampeders wanted to get creative and use him in that running back set, which again, I think is clever. I think it's smart, right? I think sometimes we overthink it in professional football. If a guy's a freak athlete, hand him the ball once a game. If for no other reason than your opponent has to prepare for the possibility that this guy gets a carry. So I like the play call from the Calgary Stampeders, but shout out Ralph Hawley. That was an incredible play he's a first-year guy, is he not?
Yeah. He's a first-year player, and he wasn't even expected. Williams had a spot. Jordan Williams had a spot on not the Jordan Williams who's been BC, Hamilton, Toronto, but the other Jordan Williams, who really impressed in his limited time, but ended up suffering an injury. And Ralph Hawley has had to step in with the loss of Jared Brinkman and the loss of Williams. He was basically the third man up in that nose tackle spot, and he's been gold. Like, what a find from this Argos front office.
Well, and Sean Oakman was here to start the year too.
Yeah.
To start, granted, I know he got cut after being healthy scratch, but still, that was another guy who was ahead of him on the depth chart. Like Ralph Hawley, in training camp, that probably wasn't encouraging for him the first time he looked at the depth chart. No. Going, so there's 1,800 guys ahead of me on this defensive line. Kudos to him. He's out there. He's making plays. Because that's all he can do, right?
Yeah.
You don't know when the opportunity is going to come up. You can just take advantage of it. He made a heck of a play on that 3rd down.
Final thought. This is your first time at BMO Field. What did you think of the BMO Field experience?
Well, I first need to thank you for correcting me. My entire life, I've said BMO Field. And because I don't bank with the Bank of Montreal. Sorry if they're a sponsor of your show.
They're not.
I don't bank with them. So you corrected me. It's BMO. So I'll stop sounding like an idiot when I say BMO Field. I like BMO. I like it. This is my first time here. I'd seen the Argos play at Skydome. I'd seen them play in Halifax, in Winnipeg, in Regina, and in Montreal. So I felt stupid having never been here. And I'll say this for those in your show. I'm a lifelong Winnipegger, but my wife is from Toronto. She grew up in the Little Italy neighborhood near College and Clinton. So she is a true Toronto gal. We visit every summer. So I've often thought of this as kind of my home away from home. I spend time here every single year, sometimes multiple times a year. So it was great to finally cross this off my bucket list. I love the giant Argos flags that make it super easy to know the banners.
Yeah.
Where the wind is blowing and how hard. I think the sight lines are great. I love the atmosphere. I love the fireworks before the game.
The cannon too.
The cannon is great. Well, we do have a cannon in Winnipeg, so I'm used to the
That's
cannon.
true.
But it still makes me jump in the press box. I love the blue smoke that shrouded the field during the pregame warmup. I don't know why other teams haven't stolen that. Like you'd think in Saskatchewan they'd have like 100 of those things and blow green smoke everywhere.
Yeah.
But anyways, I like the atmosphere. The crowds here obviously are not as large as some places in the CFL, but they are certainly mighty. That's always come across on television when I've watched, and in person, I could say in the press box when the Argos were on defense, I could feel the press box floor shaking underneath my shoes. So if you're one of those Argo fans making all that noise, making it hard for the Stampeders to communicate, I'll give you this: per capita, you're probably the loudest fans of the CFL, because we know that the crowds elsewhere might be might be a little bit louder, but they've got a lot more people to work with. So kudos to you. I will make one complaint. Granted, I'm not a small person. Don't love the seats. Not super comfortable seats. Other than that, I like BMO.
Yeah, it's a nice place to play. It's a great place to watch a game. And if you're out there thinking about coming to the next game, it's a bye week this week. And then next Thursday is the time that you can come down here. And it's a great deal, too, because the C&E is going to be on. If you buy an Argos ticket, you get free admission into the C&E. That saves you $25 right there. And $7 beers, $3 hot dogs. You can't beat it. It's great value. So hopefully I see you down here at BMO Field when the Argos host the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Well, that will just about do it for us on this postgame reaction episode of the X's and Argos podcast. For my guest co-host, John Hodge, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe.